So last night was part one of a two-part debate series that's happening on NBC News and MSNBC. On stage, we had the people over my left shoulder. We had Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, John Delaney, Cory Booker. Why am I blanking on his name? Jay Inslee, Bill de Blasio, Amy Klobuchar, Tim Ryan, and Tulsi Gabbard. Tonight, if you're watching this the day that this video is released, then tonight we have Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Andrew Yang, and many others. But this was part one of the debate. It was all these people over my left shoulder here. And a lot of interesting stuff happened. So I want to give you, before I get into specific clips, and by the way, I have a lot of them, I just want to give you my general debate breakdown, my initial thoughts. I've now watched the debate twice. Once live as I was, tweeting along with it, and then once just before I started doing this show for show prep. So I watched it twice. I've now, thoroughly digested what happened, and I've formed what my thoughts are on it. So first, let's go to the biggest losers. Now, in my opinion, and this one is a little bit controversial because some people do disagree with me on this. So this one's not unanimous. This one is not like everybody saying it. But in my opinion, I think Amy Klobuchar is one of the biggest losers. Now, the reason I say that is it was just, she was flat. She was flat the whole night, and there was nothing at all that stuck out to me. It's not even like she was flat, but she was saying some things that were good. It was just flat, and she was saying things that were me. So I'm not too surprised by Amy Klobuchar flopping. I honestly believe that in a different political era, she'd have a chance, but, it's no longer the 1980s. This kind of politician is done. And the funniest thing she said was, I'm not an establishment candidate, or I'm not the establishment candidate. She was trying to act like she's an outsider. And that's hilarious because she's, a hardcore centrist corporatist. So she is one of the establishment candidates. She represents that ideology. She represents that philosophy. So she was one of the biggest losers. On my list of biggest losers here, that's the most controversial one because I have seen some people disagree with me on that, but that's my takeaway. Now, these next two are, I think, tied, in my opinion, for just worst of the worst, almost unanimous. Everything I've seen about them agrees. Beto O'Rourke and John Delaney. Ugh, it was terrible. John Delaney, arrogantly thinks he's nailing it every time he talks, but it's like nails on a chalkboard every time he talks. Not only is his personality insufferable, also the stuff he says is stupid. He's like proudly repping that centrist badge and attacking Medicare for all and acting like, he's so smug and condescending, and he interjected and cut people off 1,000 times, and he would run into a brick wall because the moderators would stop him. Pretty much unanimous that everybody thinks John Delaney did poorly. Now, I polled you guys who you think who did the worst, and you all thought Beto O'Rourke did the worst. Yeah, I think it's a tie between Beto and John Delaney. Beto was, the entire night, he looked nervous. It's totally understandable that the first 5 minutes, first 10 minutes, or maybe your first answer or something, you're nervous because it's a big deal. You're, on a stage in front of millions of people watching from home. It's a Democratic debate. It's the first one. But he never settled in, and he never looked comfortable. He always looked nervous. He always looked on edge. And then you could see the nervousness in his eyes, but as he was massively nervous, he was also trying to counteract that by sounding more and more like a standard politician. Like he was doing his talking points, and I tweeted as I was watching it, it always seems like when Beto talks, he's trying to build to some grand crescendo, but it never comes because he says absolutely nothing. So everybody agrees that Beto did poorly. His worst moment was, and I'm going to cover this one in its own segment because it was that funny. I'm going to show you the clip later on, but his worst segment was he was asked about whether or not the top marginal tax rate should be 70%. I think that's a pretty good question, okay? You know what his response was? To say the economy should work for everybody, and then he goes on to speak in Spanish. It came across as like pure pandering. Like, yeah, I'm going to dodge it, and yeah, I'm going to be a standard politician, and yeah, I'm also going to try to score, like, virtue signaling brownie points by speaking Spanish, and I'm hoping that that will override the fact that I didn't answer the question, because I'm probably not going to do dick when it comes to raising taxes on the rich. So he did terrible. Those were the three biggest losers. Now, before I get to the biggest winners, let me give you the notables and tell you what happened with them. When I say notables, I mean kind of like middle ground type characters here. So Tim Ryan actually started off really strong, and for a while he was maybe one of the leaders in the debate. Like, he was doing that well. And then he ran into a brick wall called Tulsi Gabbard, and she destroyed him on the issue of Afghanistan and on war, to the point where he went from being one of the better debaters to being one of the losers. Now, the reason I didn't put him among the actual biggest losers, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, and John Delaney, is because I felt like they did worse than Tim Ryan. At least Tim Ryan had like half the debate where he was doing well, and then he, shit himself and gave it all away at the end. But at least he had moments where you can go, oh, okay, he did a good job there. Now, Jay Inslee was notable because I think he actually did a good job, but he spoke the least amount of everybody on stage, and I think it came across that way. Like, he did the most with the little he spoke, but he's not going to leave a lasting impression on people because he didn't speak enough. He just didn't. And that's, by the way, that's the reality of it. They actually released the amount of time that each candidate spoke, and dead last was Jay Inslee. So I think he did a good job, and he's a better candidate than I thought, but he just didn't speak enough. So, I don't think he helped his campaign. I don't think he hurt his campaign, but when you're polling at 1%, you got to help your campaign. So, we'll see what happens with him, but that's what I thought happened with Jay Inslee. Now, Booker and Castro, they're interesting cases because there are many people who say Cory Booker did well, and there are many people who say Julian Castro did well, including many of the people in my own audience. Here's what I'll say about them. They didn't do any damage to their campaigns. They just didn't. And it's funny because when you put Beto O'Rourke and John Delaney under pressure, they appear nervous and they appear even more awkward. When you put Cory Booker and Julian Castro under pressure, they didn't appear as awkward as they usually seem. Like, usually they are just, Cory Booker and his dad jokes, and he just comes across in a creepy way. Julian Castro with his, I'm a standard politician shtick, which is so infuriating and annoying, and he's always on script. But during this debate, they didn't do poorly. Now, the reason why I don't put them among the biggest winners is because they still said nothing of substance. And when you say nothing of substance, I'm not going to put you among the winners because you didn't say anything of substance. You didn't say anything that leaves a long impact on people. You didn't have any one-line zingers. You didn't carve a path for yourself as the person who's all about X, fill in the blank, whatever X may be. No, you just kind of talked a lot and didn't hurt yourself, but didn't really help yourself. And even though they performed in a solid way and in a smooth way, it just wasn't enough for me to walk away going, oh, wow, did they do well? Again, they didn't hurt themselves, but, I don't think they helped themselves too much. Is it possible that one of them or both of them gets a slight bump out of this debate? Sure. But is it possible that they've launched themselves into the conversation among the real leaders in this race? I don't think that's the case yet. I could be wrong, but that's my sense of it. Okay, now the biggest winners. First and foremost, I'm going to go Tulsi. I will say this though, she started very slow. And in fact, if you asked me halfway through the debate, I would have said flat out, she's not doing well. I said going into the debate she had to be aggressive. She was not aggressive for at least half the debate. And when you're polling at 1%, you have to be aggressive. You have to make a name for yourself. You have to, carve a path as somebody who belongs in the conversation about who should really become the Democratic presidential nominee. Now, having said that, even though she started slow, she ended super strong, really strong. She absolutely obliterated Tim Ryan on the issue of Afghanistan to the point where I think it almost makes up for the fact that she started super slow. Like, that's almost totally forgotten because she was swinging a hatchet at his face and everybody noticed. And also, there are some metrics to say that she did well in the debate because all the snap polls happening after the debate had Tulsi winning. I'll show you one of those in a little bit. But also, she was like the number one searched candidate of all the candidates on stage. So, I mean, that's a big deal. It shows people are interested. Like, ooh, who's this? What's she saying? So I think she did great on the issue of war. I would advise her moving forward, though, you can't start slow anymore in these debates. You have to come out hard. You have to come out swinging and be aggressive. And what you did with Tim Ryan on the issue of Afghanistan, you have to do with every issue, not just war, but rep that lefty position on every issue. And don't be afraid to slap around the media a little bit, because they smear Tulsi all the time, and she doesn't really respond in a way that I think makes sense to kind of put them in their place and reframe everything. So I would tell Tulsi, be a little meaner, be a little more aggressive, assert yourself more. Now, the other big winners, Elizabeth Warren. That's slightly overstating it to say she's a big winner, but here's the deal. Of those candidates on stage, she was leading in the polls of those candidates on stage. So in a way, she could get away with like protecting that lead a little bit. And she did exactly that. I mean, it was a very solid, a very, very solid performance. She didn't say any one thing that made me go, oh, she knocked it out of the park. But at the same time, she didn't say anything at all that made me go, oh, that's a bad answer and Liz is hurting herself there. So yeah, I think she did a good job. I think she did a solid job. I think that she maybe a criticism of her that's fair is she still leaned a little too much on the wonky side and the technocratic side and not enough on the side of like a swashbuckling populist. But having said that, that is who Elizabeth Warren is. She is a wonky technocrat. She's not as much of a Bernie Sanders-style swashbuckling populist. But certainly she's not going to slip in the polls after this. At worst, she'll stay the same, but I think at best she might actually bump up a little bit because she did, and I hate to use this term because I personally don't care about this metric, but she did come across as presidential, and are there some people who are going to want that kind of politician in the age of Trump? Sure. People are going to want temperamentally that kind of a break from Trump. Now, substantively, and that's what matters the most, the policy substance is what matters the most, but she did kind of plant her flag as, yes, I'm going to rep a lefty position. You're not going to see me, sprint to the center. Medicare for All was an interesting topic where she said, I agree with Bernie Sanders, but the details of the question on that was really sketchy. We're going to get to that later, and I'll talk about that in detail. But she was one of the biggest winners because she just did no damage, and when you're leading, just doing no damage is actually fine, and she was leading of the candidates on stage. So Tulsi, Elizabeth Warren, these are two big winners. And the final big winner, Bill de Blasio. Now, I am patting myself on the back massively because I called this in my debate breakdown video, my pre-debate breakdown video. I said that of these candidates on stage, I want Tulsi to do well, and I want Elizabeth Warren to do well, and I said Tulsi's got to be aggressive, and I said Bill de Blasio is probably going to surprise some people because when he ran for New York City mayor, he ran as a super far lefty, and he was not playing around. Now, of course, I contend that Bill de Blasio was kind of a fraud because in 2016, he backed Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders in the primary, which is just insanity. You can't pretend like you're this super far lefty and you back the most establishment candidate of all time. But he did, yet again, do that convincing tap dance of like, yeah, I'm a candidate that's viable and I'm a force to be reckoned with. And I think he definitely helped himself here. I think he definitely gave himself a little bit of a bump. He had one answer that was super cringeworthy on like the biggest threats of the country. He said Russia, and it was just gross. But virtually everything else he said was solid, and he's a good debater, and he's a strong speaker, and I think he helped himself out. So that's my general debate breakdown. I'm sure there's going to be agreement and disagreement among you guys. A lot of people are convinced that Castro did really well in particular. And a lot of people are convinced that Beto was way worse than Delaney. But yeah, that's my debate breakdown there. Now, stay tuned because I'm about to get into a bunch of specific segments, and they are awesome.